Welcome to Planning Commission. It's September 23rd, 2021. So I guess, does anyone have any issues with the minutes from last time?
I move approval.
All right.
I'll second that.
Did we go through a full vote for that?
Yeah.
We can all just say aye, right?
Just,
Yeah, you can do it multiple ways on this one, just all in favor.
Okay, all
Or
in
if you'd
favor?
like to do roll call.
Aye.
that's fine.
Aye.
All right, so the first item on our agenda is a public hearing for a rezone of 0.18 acres of property from healthcare to public business zoning district. So staff, do you want to?
This
Take it
one would be
away.
me. Just south of the DATC pond, we call it, I don't know, Lake Fiesta. And there's a house that was converted some years ago into a public business building. And it stayed like that for many years. And then a new owner got it and wanted to put in a healthcare facility there. So they come in, I think it was in 98 or not 98, 18. And 98 and 18 and rezoned it to HC. And then the pandemic hit and everything, so she closed it down, and now she's got a new renter that wants to come back and do office buildings, but HC does not allow for it. So they're gonna have to go back to the public or the professional building zone, which it once before was, and that's where we're at with it. I haven't had any calls or emails other than just asking what was going on there, and once I told them, everybody just said, oh, okay, thanks, and hung up, so I don't think there was any issues with the public. That's pretty much where we're at with it.
Okay. So does she already have someone who wants to?
Yes, I believe so. I
So do
believe
we
she's
know, like,
got
what
a
maybe is going to go in there?
business that wants to go in there.
Okay.
There's a business that's applied for a business loan, so they're actually waiting for this in order to occupy the building. I think they occupy it, but not doing business yet.
Oh, okay.
is this just a rezone request? They're not going to tear the building down?
Correct. Yeah, the site will remain the same as our understanding. Yeah, I think it used to be, I think it was Valentine CPA. It used to be an accounting office, and then as Dan explained with the healthcare, we had to change it, and now it's going back to a similar office type function in the same building.
Looks like the property owner is not here, so we don't need to hear from them, and there's no public to comment.
Still have to go public hearing.
So it is a public hearing, so now is time for public comment. Anyone? All right, seeing as there's no public here, we'll close the public comment. And then I guess we can entertain a motion, or if anyone has anything they want to say about it.
I'll make a motion. So I move that we recommend approval of the rezone of 0.18 acres of property from HC to PB at 479 South Main Street.
I'll second.
All right, we will start the voting with Jared.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
So it looks like we're unanimous on that one. All right, so our next item of business is a public hearing for consideration of a water efficient landscaping ordinance. I guess we'll turn it over to staff.
Now, I'll give just a brief presentation on this, since we don't have much public here to share where we're at with it, and most of the commission probably does. Recall what we've been up to. So again, the basis on this drought kind of highlights the whole issue of let's do better with our water use. And this landscape ordinance is based off of an example that came from Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, which relays pretty much all of our water into the area for us. And What I have before you on the staff report this evening isn't much of a change from our previous conversation. There are some changes, and I'll talk about a few things. Largely, I think based on the interest of the commission, it was, well, let's maybe see what the public has to say, and that'll help inform what changes we do make and what direction this goes forward, and thus having the public hearing tonight. And I have not received any calls or much interest. I don't know if Dan or Mindy's had really anything on this. There's a general support from the public to, yeah, we could do better, in particular because it affects new construction, and it's not mandating people go back and tear out their grass on their existing houses. So this is tailored towards new builds, new subdivisions. But what it would do, if we meet certain criteria for Weber Basin, it would allow then for existing homes to potentially qualify for some incentives to help retrofit. And the current program is the flip your strip for a park strip and tear that out. So what I tried to do in this version, whether I succeeded or not, I'm not sure, but is to organize it hopefully a little bit better so it showed what is, at least as written, what affects residential type development. One of the questions that the commission had at the last meeting was, is this just big contractor or developer? Are they the only ones that need to do this, or would this be kind of the random lot, one-off build that would apply to? I spoke with John Perry again with Weber Basin. He's the one that came in and spoke with us as a commission. And his answer was, really, we would like to see all construction go about this. And I think that's probably makes a lot of sense. So even in a scenario where a big builder comes in and builds 100 homes, they don't always finish the lots. A lot of that is often, not always, it depends on the scenario, but left to the home buyer. So you may move in 6 months later, decide you want to finish your land. And so I think that's maybe where there's going to be some separation from big builder anyways as to how we would enforce this. And I highlighted in the proposal a couple things. One, that I think is primary of interest are the green areas. Those are the items that Weber Basin Water Conservancy District is interest that we implement. Everything else is kind of bonus. So again, with residential, kind of the key is let's encourage people not to put grass in park strips or grass in areas that don't do well or require a significant amount of water, such as steep slopes. And then generally just limiting the amount of turf that a property could have to 35%, making sure they use drip irrigation where there's not the need for spray. And if we hit those, that's fine. The way that this is kind of set up, and I don't know if I got the correct understanding from the commission, we could really simplify a lot and kind of break down with that, but I think there was interest from the commission on maybe we don't necessarily want to just mandate that everybody do the same and follow these exact steps. If somebody were willing to hire a landscape architect, for example, then they'd be welcome to do that and prove that, hey, I'm using a different type of grass that requires less water or whatever the scenario might be, and thus qualify under a water usage calculation that they've provided to the city. So it allows for both options the way that this is currently set up, even in the residential scenario. And then the last, maybe highlight kind of the same deal as it goes into commercial, industrial. Again, I don't know if I succeeded in kind of expanding the definition where the last time we spoke about this, it appeared to be and probably was so geared towards maybe just commercial alone and didn't necessarily touch on schools, churches, public buildings, the institutional uses hopefully within this. And the definition above, I'm hoping captures, I think, what the commission was looking for to make sure that, these big institutions, which often are the biggest users, participate as well and put in wateralized landscaping. And again, commercial development gets less turf than single-family residential type development. And instead of 35% maximum, they have a 15% maximum of turf usage on their properties. So, hoping we might have got a little more public input and comment to maybe steer the conversation and what changes could be there. But that's where we're at with it is, again, not a lot of drastic changes, but hopefully this.
Lyle, in 176768, you reference just there that this, and I know the city passed it because I came to the city council meeting when they passed the ordinance for the water restrictions the city has in place. Simply, my only comment would be just leave that section in and just simply reference the city code in there so it's in both places.
Okay.
I think that's very amenable and very helpful because then it demonstrates that if I can find it multiple places, it's referenced there.
Do we open this up for public comment before we?
Yeah, if you want to officially open and close public comment, you're welcome to do that, Madam Chair. And
We'll open public comment. Seeing as no one's here, we will close the public comment time. Keep going.
Yeah, so I think that's a great comment, Commissioner Lyon, and we can certainly do that. I need to get a little bit more familiar myself with the new one that was passed. I think a lot of what the restriction is in the new one is mostly time of day usage. And this speaks a little bit to how you're using it. So we'll have to see how they mesh, but we could just reference, and I think that'd be fantastic.
I know some cities also do like house number and date. So if you're even, you water even days. If you're odd, you water odd days. So I think it demonstrates also back to the Conservancy District that the city's working across multiple ordinances to achieve the same goal.
So I'll throw in maybe just a little bit of discussion that we've had internally. I've struggled a little bit with how to write this ordinance, maybe from more of a principled manner or philosophical manner than the text itself. I still personally feel meters are the solution, not a lot of this other stuff, but it's not necessarily a bad thing either to say. And as we've talked through it as staff, how do we regulate and enforce and verify all of these elements? The theory is somebody comes in to build a new structure or building, okay, submit a landscape plan with that. And in the case of a single-family residential, it could be very simple, something showing 30% grass roughly, that's all they're planning on planting. And in a commercial case, they're going to have a landscape architect that details it out. So that may not be that problematic to verify those details up front. But again, back to the residential example, Ivory Homes, I suppose, comes in and builds a subdivision. Maybe they don't landscape the lots. We don't generally require that somebody come in to get a permit for their landscaping. So if the homeowner is not going to come in and do it, or they might put in their yard 6 months after purchasing the house, they may not even know that they needed to come do it. It's something that we'd have to work out. Or if Ivory submits a home in this example, and the homeowner does or doesn't follow it, we're working with them. So there's some logistical issues I think that we're still trying to grapple with, grasp and understand as staff. Commercial is probably going to be a little bit easier, frankly, where they're going to build and they're going to finish it all together in just about every instance. The builder will take care of that, but again, the long-term enforcement of it can be difficult too, because it's so easy for people to go out and change a yard where we might have occupancy go out in the case where we're lucky enough to have a building finished and they do the landscape at the same time, and we can check drip irrigation valves and sizes and turf. And in the case of a home, they throw up a fence and next week they go put seed down in their backyard or sod and theoretically, right, put down more grass. And
Lyle, I wonder if this can take some thinking how you do it, but almost when you approve a new subdivision and you know the number of homes, that in the deed documents that go out with the builder, that you don't insert in those deed documents what the requirements are, so the homeowner is then made aware. I mean, there's got to be a mechanism there that it alerts them. So if you approve a subdivision for like 30 homes, then the builder then has to then insert this in there and make the homeowner aware of what the requirements are.
Why would that be needed more than just it being on the books?
It's a
the-
good question. I think
It's a good
Steve maybe
question.
has a point, though, because
The same reason, so you buy the lot, and the builder is not gonna finish it. You as the homeowner will finish it. Therefore, you would wanna make them aware of what the requirements are.
yeah, it doesn't require anything more
Doesn't
out of them than the
require
books
anything more, it's
would,
just-
but they're not gonna, it gives them the notice, I guess,
It's
is,
just,
Yeah, but, I mean, I see the point. I guess
It's just-
I would hesitate on that because why is this something that would take precedent more, I mean, in other words, why haven't we been telling people that there's certain accessory building ordinances and get that on their document when a
Yeah.
builder sells to them? I mean, it opens the floodgates that are unnecessary to open, in my opinion.
okay.
I don't know.
It's just a thought, I mean,
Yeah.
the builder will be aware of it, obviously.
I know one of the things Weber Basin wants, and whether this is the solution, is in a residential subdivision, for example, they have a model home and they want us to require that they have pamphlets for the type of landscaping and why they're using water-wise landscaping. So in theory, there's some notice as people go in to buy, this is what the neighborhood's set up to do, but
This is the new standard.
So, Lyle, I have a question. I think I know the answer, but I'm not 100% certain. So the green items are what Weber Basin is requiring of us to insert into this ordinance. And by so doing, what do we then, or what do the citizens then receive? Like, what benefit comes to the citizens by
Yeah, so-
including those standards?
as you're considering this, I think that's extremely relevant because we could come up with an ordinance that maybe doesn't check all these boxes, and we just have to decide if it's worth it or not that people get these incentives, right? So what currently Weber Basin has, as far as a program, is this Flip Your Strip program. And what they're saying is they will only offer this incentive to residents in cities who are participating with these ordinances. And that particular program is, they will contribute up to $1.50 per square foot of, to tear out and put in a local scape or a water-wise landscaping in your park strip. So it's park strip specific. Just as an example, if you were to, probably the average home, 90 feet of frontage, maybe 30 of that is driveway, so I know you got 60 feet by 240 square feet, you might get $300 to help you do it. And it's not gonna cover the full cost of what it takes, probably by a long shot. Rock and mulch and other things can be expensive. The program as it's written now requires that there be some live plant material in there. And so you may remember some that went on that tour. They had just native plants, low water use plants. They had drip irrigation systems in there. And in our conversation with them, we said, look, I think we do have a lot of residents who are willing and interested to get rid of the grass. But part of that is saving water and part of it is simple ease of maintenance. They don't want to put anything back in other than rocker mulch, just a true zero scape. Is that okay? And Weber Basin is open to allowing that and still giving some incentives. So I think there's a tiny bit of flex in how this works, but the big picture items they're looking for,
Yeah, if
that's
I-
the program.
If I remember right, the reason that the green is in there, the planning was in there, is because the communities in Salt Lake County required it based on their strips. So if our community didn't want that, they were open to excluding that.
They did say there may be future programs that
Besides
just
that
don't
one.
exist yet, but that's all there is now.
Okay. So I guess I have some thoughts on the park strip thing. And then, as I've already mentioned, and this, I guess I'm just speaking to the city council, to their ears, I guess, when they consider this, keep these things in mind, I suppose. I don't know, I don't think necessarily that we have to just say park strips should have no turf. I would be more in favor of, actually, I don't really like saying X percent of turf anyway, but if we're gonna put a number on turf, let the turf go where the homeowner wants the turf. I mean, I understand at least some of the rationale in limiting turf in the park strips, it's a smaller area. I mean, we're saying less than 8 feet, which gets hard to water, which also gets, more importantly, gets difficult to water efficiently. I get all that. But I think we should define turf, because not all turf are created equal. Some are equal or even better than non-turf in terms of water usage. They may not be the best to maintain or easiest to maintain, but I think when we think of turf, we think Kentucky bluegrass or whatever, and not all turf's equal. So that, I think maybe even having a definition of turf that I didn't see in there.
Turf defined in the definition.
Okay, what does it say?
Sorry.
No, yeah, I thought I saw it.
A
All right, look.
surface layer of
Oh, I
earth
see.
containing grass species with full root structures that are maintained as mowed grass.
Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't see that. So, well, that kind of just begs the question, any of those.
Is it buffalo grass?
Yeah, all of those,
Grandma grass?
all of those water-wise turfs at Weber Basin would arguably fall under there. So are we saying, do we really want to restrict those, or do we want to restrict some of them? And then the other thing too is, beyond the park strips, the 35%, as I think I mentioned before, on single-family, new primary dwellings, single-family. I just did some quick math. This is on a napkin, essentially. Okay, so for a half-acre lot, that's 21,780 square feet. And I went generous and said, okay, let's say there was, give or take 5,000 or 6,000 square foot footprint of a house, plus driveway and other hardscape areas of 1,500 square feet. So bring those together, you got, say there's 7,500 square feet that you take out. The rest is landscape area. That would be the number that you say can only be 35% turf. So by doing that, the math would be, that means you're left with 14,280 square feet. And 35% of that is basically just shy of 5,000 square feet. So you're left with approximately 9,000 square feet of area that cannot be turf. That's a lot of non-turf area. And when the word gets around, nobody's here, but I can tell you, my guess is, when the word got around about that, when enough people said, well, you have to do what in Kaysville? It would not go over well. We're passing this in the dark of night, so to speak, but it's because people don't care about this until it affects them. And I think this would really ruffle some feathers, but maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. I mean, my guess, and this is probably what Weber Basin wants. They're saying, exactly, and we want those feathers ruffled. Sure, and that's their view on this matter, or on this issue. But, you know, if you went and said, what are the, every home that was built in the last 5 years west of I-15 in Kaysville, very few, if any, would even come close to that, is my guess, the ones that have landscaping.
I thought we said 35% of the lot, not the landscaped area earlier. Did that get changed?
I haven't changed how it's written, it's just
Is
kind of
that what
copy
we
and
said
paste.
Because
But I-
that seemed more reasonable to me. This, I agree, this is really,
Yeah, I think
Not-
my understanding of what Commissioner Sumnot's explained is accurate. I don't think I've changed it, but that's the way it's in here. This is
it's
just
always said.
essentially
just
copy and paste.
landscaped area. If it said lot, then. that
And you're correct, it would be
seems-
very different if you didn't have to subtract that
Yeah.
hard surface that Commissioner Sumnot's referring to. I mean, he's accurate on that. So I think that's a big question is, we can still support water efficient landscaping. Is it worth?
This is the
this
language
to
from
the law
Weber
to-
Basin. This is how they worded it.
Correct.
And this is similar to the one that was passed in.
Man, I want to go back and look at some of those other versions. I didn't think it said just landscaped area. Because that got my attention too, and I saw it, and I thought, oh, boy, that's tight.
Have the
Well, do-
surrounding municipalities, have the surrounding cities signed this specific?
Layton City has, I know, recently passed a pretty,
Theirs is more.
theirs is essentially this.
Okay, so it complies with this.
I believe so. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else in the county has done it yet, but I do know that Layton City has passed one, and I believe that's what they included.
So Josh, those drought-tolerant grasses, like St. Augustine, I'm not sure if that's the right one, but they use a lot less water
Blue grandma.
than bluegrass.
Yeah, I mean,
We got more specific and said you can have more grass, but it's gotta be this type of species.
Buffalo.
I guess my only concern
The
with,
point that they brought up when they were, oh, sorry, Toby.
yeah, I guess my only concern with that is that just because you have a certain type of grass doesn't mean you're going to water less. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not going to control how much you water. So I think that's the concern.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
that's what
that's part of
the
the education.
representative brought up, is he's like, you can, but these grasses
And
are
I'll
different
say,
and water them the same.
we put in blue grandma in my yard. And by the time it's established, you water it once a week for about an hour. But your roots would go down about 3 feet. And it's a drought tolerant grass. But you have to be willing to go in and educate on that. Because otherwise, you can kill the grass off by overwatering it.
What kind of species do you have?
Blue grandma.
Oh. I thought you said bluegrass. I thought,
No,
oh.
it's a blue, no, blue grandma. No, we did not do bluegrass.
And it's once a week, a deep watering, and that's.
Once it's established, it takes about 2 years to establish.
Yeah, then it's an education process.
That's an education
which
process for the
Maybe that
homeowner.
app could help to educate.
But there's certain types, you've got buffalo grass, blue grandma, there's certain types of rye, there's certain types, I mean, you have different types of grass that are conditioned for this environment. But it goes back to kind of what where the Weaver Basin was talking. People still put 3 or 4 days worth of water on that grass because they've been conditioned to always water their grass.
but the one mitigating factor to that would be, along with these green highlighted elements amongst the other things, the new stuff's gonna have a meter.
Correct.
So they're gonna
know.
have a limit there, I think, that's gonna make them think twice.
Yeah, I'm metered. And every month I get a metering report from Davis Weaver showing the amount of water I use.
Yeah.
You meter and then charge based on water usage. That's how you control people that like to overwater.
And
Agreed.
you
There's no other
make
way
it like
you're gonna get their
exponential
attention.
price after a certain threshold.
That's right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Cottonwood Water Company in Morgan's done that. I mean, you get your base rate, and then it triples in price past the base rate, and then it doubles on that secondary, so. And they had people that, thought, great, we'll put in 6,000, they had, was it 6 acres of grass. And we're watering it, and they sucked them dry the first summer they were in there.
See, and I've already, maybe this might be the last thing I'll say, but I'm much, much more in favor of that type of approach. Just say, look, I think we're all generally in agreement. We need to address water usage. Here's a standard of water you can use on your lot. If you want it, it's like a cell phone bill. If you want data, you can pay for unlimited data, sure. It'll slow down and get really expensive after a certain threshold. Same kind of thing with water almost. Different, of course, but use this standard water, we'll meter it. Make your whole yard bluegrass. You're only gonna have water that's sufficient for shrubs and some, buffalo grass, but if you wanna have bluegrass, sure. Standardize the usage, make it objective. Don't put all these requirements of what it's supposed to look like on everyone's lot within percentages and certain types of shrubs, certain types of grass. That gets far too restrictive, in my opinion, and it's not necessary. But we lose incentives from Weaver Basin, and I get all that too, so.
When we lived in Illinois, suburb of Chicago, we got our first water bill on that new house that we bought, and it was over $200 to water the grass. And then we realized that's why all of our neighbors had yellow grass in July and August. And that's just what people accepted. But if you wanted to water, you can, but you'd pay for it.
Yeah.
And so we immediately said, we're going to go yellow like everybody else.
Yep.
It's amazing when you have to pay for it, how people's behavior changes.
Yep.
Sorry to walk us backwards, but I agree with those concerns. But back to your ideas and thoughts on regulating this. What is the follow-up? I mean, say if someone presents their plans, gets a permit, does that mean that they will comply? And what if they don't comply? What
Right.
teeth do you have to bite?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, if we don't put it on the ordinance, we have 0 teeth. If it's in the ordinance, then technically we could go through a compliance process and potentially fine them and make them change it and tear it out or whatever the case may be. It's pretty onerous, and frankly, is the amount of manpower and staff we have, and it's going to be difficult to be on top of it. I don't know if neighbors will turn each other in on how much grass somebody's put in, or if they've changed and taken out their rock or whatever. But there is a concern on that, honestly, from our end, and something that's I find a little bit interesting. I think it was Commissioner Sunloss's numbers. If you think of 70 or 65% xeriscape or xeriscape versus 35% turf, and I think Commissioner Doxey's relayed in the past how much an upfront cost there is to landscaping in that manner. It's more expensive not to just throw down a whole bunch of sod or seed grass. New construction doesn't get the incentive anyway. This is for existing people that retrofit. That's what these programs would be for. There is a cost implication to new development, and we're in a housing market that's already very expensive, to requiring essentially what this landscaping ordinance entails, and maybe that's the right thing, maybe it's not, but I think it's at least worth being aware of. But maybe you decide that new construction needs to do that. It's the existing residents, the 10,000 or so lots that are, is it worth following this to the letter, at least the green portions, to allow them to qualify for some incentives? And
Yeah, I think the
it's a big
capacity
question.
of the city staff to regulate that would become critical, because if it's not well regulated, the message gets out really fast that, yeah, it's an ordinance, but no one follows up. I mean, we just submitted our request, it was approved, but we did what we wanted, and therefore you should too.
I believe even the way this ordinance is written, currently we don't have a time frame when people have to put in landscaping. We do require that places be kept weed-free and in good condition kind of thing, but this does implement a time frame. I think it's you got to start within like 6 months and finish within 18 months of your occupancy on your home, if I remember correctly. But again, generally, you get occupancy, we're done as a city. We're not in there checking on things after that point. I don't have building inspectors enough to keep going back time and again for landscaping inspections. We've got plenty to do. So it is a challenge, and that is a concern of ours, is how do we actually regulate it? So the idea of looking at a plan is pretty easy, and we're good at that, and we can do that, verifying that on paper it meets, but everything after, the timing, is a challenge for our office.
So Lyle, if we're wanting to, I mean, it seems like, I don't know, the other, or one of the other maybe options to regulate this is, for everyone to have a meter, but when do we anticipate everyone having a meter? And when they do, are we going to start charging them for water?
Yeah. So all new construction has been, for a few years already, been required to put in meters on irrigation connections, so that's happening.
And that's not a city requirement, that's the water, either retailer or Weber Davis.
Correct.
Or
I think the state of Utah
whatever.
actually mandates it.
Well, state of Utah, okay.
But as you're saying, it's these retailers, providers that are making sure they're installed. So there are a lot out there. And then the districts that we do have been doing some retrofit, but it's expensive. I'm kind of shooting off the cusp, but I've heard numbers somewhere in the ballpark of about $2,000 per meter to swap it out and put in the new. And so, there are grant programs from the feds and the state that are helping them do it, but it's going to be years, I don't know, a decade or more before really they can do that.
My friend's on Benchland's water board, and he said they've got, I think, 25% done right now, and their goal is to have like 70% done within 5 years, so that they can meet. He says it's all the new construction, but they're almost all built. I mean, Farmington's mostly built out where they're putting these in, so that's all retrofit.
So if we agree that metering is the way to deal with this, then we're 5 to 10 years kicking the road down, the can down the road?
Yeah, something like that, right? So
On the existing,
Yeah, but they're not gonna start charging people until they can charge everyone, right?
yeah, and I don't know exactly how the districts are doing it, but I believe you're right. So because not everybody has a meter, they let them know how much water they're using if they have one, but the compensation or the actual charge per use, I think they really are hinging on everybody having that in place. I don't know that that's essential to be that way, but I think that's how they see it. once we got everybody on a meter, then we can start charging per use.
I think if we're trying to solve a problem that we saw in the community where you need to implement something before then, maybe not necessarily this, if we don't agree with some of the tenets of this, but if we're wanting to, I guess, contribute to the solution, we'll probably want to come up with ways that we would feel comfortable at least doing something.
Well, that may be.
Something to forward to the city council, that would be, I guess, their job.
Okay. And not to put a motion in front of you, but I think I've got a sense, again, I think the public generally says, yeah, let's be smarter about our water, but we're not seeing, specific solutions from public comment this evening. I think it's a big enough, there seem to be some shared concerns on this route and that specific of a restriction. We'll kind of go back to the drawing board. I'll get Weber Basin back on the phone and look at maybe different ideas to say, hey,
Can I
Kaysville's
add one
want
comment?
something different. Please do.
They do regulate it though, because they are varying the time frame that they are allowing to water. Like this year, they're shutting it down early. And so ultimately, they can regulate it that way too. They can just say, hey, we're out of water for this year, we're done. And so they are regulating that way as well.
Has anyone heard from the state how we've done in water conservation this year as a state? Is there any statistics that have come out? Because the governor's sure been vocal about it.
Well, didn't they say at the meeting that when we went on the field trip that they had conserved water so that we would have drinking water next year? But if things don't improve, there will be no secondary water.
Yes, that's correct, if we don't get a good winter also. But yeah, if you go drive the dams right now, I mean, they just announced Lake Powell by 2023 will not be able to generate hydropower.
There is enough? There is enough to generate hydro?
For 2022, going into 2023,
Boy, that would knock out Vegas.
oh yeah, you start thinking about all the stuff, but that's where we're at. I mean, we've had poor winters the last few years. So I think conservation is a piece of this. It's also building capacity. We've had a huge influx. I mean, there's several pieces that fit into this, but we've had a large influx of new people in the state and growth. And with that comes, you have to build capacity for that. So I think there's two sides of the conversation. Conservation only gets you so far, but you also have to build capacity. And to build capacity, you've got to build dams.
And I don't have specific data as to how conservation efforts went,
how it's worked.
although I recall reading some news articles that generally they were seeing a difference. People responded to, hey, we're in a drought, water less, and you just drive around town and you saw yellow spots in people's yards and crunchy spots, and so.
You almost feel guilty if your grass was too green.
Sure. So I think they noticed significant changes in behavior with the PR efforts and such that were done this year just on that alone, but yeah, I don't have numbers. Okay. Well, if that's all right, Madam Chair, maybe a motion. It looks like we kind of dive deeper into this and look at alternate options as maybe how it's going to work better for our community and at least come back with options for the commission. Might be good for us.
Okay, yeah, so I guess I'll entertain a motion on what you guys feel is appropriate.
So would that be like tabling?
I think so, yeah.
That's what we
I
would
don't
call
think you
them.
need to
That's what
table
we
it
would
to
call
time
it.
certain it, but you can table the item.
Put it back to staff.
Unless you have a different recommendation, you're also welcome to make that as well, so.
I'll make a motion that we table this item to allow staff to further investigate other options in the manner they feel most effective and bring it back for further consideration.
I'll second.
All right, we'll start the voting with Steve.
Aye.
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 Aye. Is there a deadline on this one, Lyle?
No, I mean, I can
Next
check with
spring.
Weber Basin, but that's,
Next spring?
I think theoretically the goal, yeah.
We'll see how much water we have by then.
Yeah, hopefully sometime before we run out. All right, so,
Which
just keep the Facebook shaming groups going.
Our next item on the agenda is a public hearing for an instructional home occupation ordinance. I'll turn that over to staff.
Okay, so this is one that we discussed a couple meetings ago as well. The ordinance that's in the packet has not been changed since that meeting, but I think, again, the direction from the commission was similar of, it's a new concept. It's kind of, at least from my looking around a little bit, unique to Kaysville on what kinds of businesses this would permit. And I'll pull up the actual text if we want to go through it more in detail. But again, the general idea is typically within our home businesses, we're saying a few types. You're either so small, you do tax accounting or something at a desk in your home, you don't have customers, people wouldn't even know you're there. You're a minor home occupation. We have our major home occupations that might have either one employee that helps the resident of the house with their business, or the resident may have some customers come, and that might be a tutoring session or a beauty salon or something like that in a home. And then we have agricultural home occupations that are a little bit more robust, small engine repair or things like that. But in essentially every one of those categories, we're saying the person who lives there is conducting the business. And with one exception, or small exceptions, they don't have outside help with that business. So there are just a couple exceptions to that. This new idea is one that addresses some interest that we've heard, at least as staff, of people saying, hey, we've got facilities, a pool, a sports court, or unique things where maybe not everybody has that, and our neighbors would like to use that to teach lessons in this case. So what the ordinance is set up to accommodate is it doesn't have to be the resident of the property that runs and conducts the business. Obviously, they would have to have their permission to let somebody on there and conduct it. But this would allow outside people to run a business at somebody's home if it's for that specific purpose of providing instruction or educational opportunity for somebody else. So that's kind of the big scope of it. We're going to do the public hearing to see if people thought it was a good idea or not. So we'll let you open that, Madam Chair, then probably close it right away based on our attendance and have some discussion.
All right, yeah, so we will open this up for public input. Seeing as there's no public, we will close it and get to business.
So maybe just a big picture question. Is it a crazy idea? Is it worth exploring? If it's worth exploring, then we can get into the weeds. But I'm kind of curious, again, just on the general temperament from the commission of, are you interested in maybe allowing people that general use of their property by having others do some services there?
One thing I was going to say on the last ordinance, or the last discussion about the landscape ordinance, and then compare it to this one is, and I think I may have said this in other contexts in the past, but one fear that I have of municipal government, and actually every level of government, let's just use the federal government as a bad example. Every legislative session, more law is created, right? It's like, just just put it more on the books. And that happens at the state level. Sometimes it happens at the municipal level. When there's a problem to be addressed, we create more laws. Sometimes it's a reduction of freedom, which I think the landscape ordinance kind of is. Sometimes addressing a problem and creating a law increases the freedom, and I think this is an example of that. This is saying, look, currently under our code, we see a need for this type of use, but it's not something that we formally recognize. So let's allow people to do this. Let's create this, let's facilitate this use. And you know, I recognize in some respects we are still limiting it by passing a law, but I tend to look a little more favorably to things like this as opposed to things that just say problem, laws, restriction of what people can do. So in light of that, I think it's definitely worth exploring, and I think this is what's been provided in the packet is a good start. maybe even close enough to pass it along to the council.
My other question is, does the city care about liability between the parties, or is that simply to their,
Yeah, that was a
Let
question
people
I
worry
had
about it.
also.
is that out of our purview?
I could double check with the attorney and maybe bring an answer back to you, but I would assume like a commercial situation, it's a private entity where generally there's a tenant leasing a space and that's their business.
That's fine.
We license businesses all the time through somebody else's
I just want to
property.
make sure that what we're not saying is we're legitimizing a relationship that then goes back and says, because of that relationship, then they're saying we have some liability. I just want to make sure that we're not in that process. I know in some of the contracts I do with federal CDBG, we have to make sure that that relationship doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'd be happy to
I just want to
clarify
make
that
sure,
with the
I
legal
want to make sure that
team.
we're not incurring liability on the city's sake.
Okay.
So to provide proof that the homeowner is willing, how do we have a way that is required for them to show that, or?
Yeah, we've yet to kind of set this one up, but we could have some paperwork that comes in or part of the form, an application, that they have to provide a letter or something by the property owner demonstrating their permission. So, yeah, we would have to think through the application itself. And again, I don't know the exact answer to, I think, the question that Steve has, or Commissioner Lyon, but just as some examples, again, in a commercial setting, we know who the property owner is. We don't always have their sign off and autograph. They kind of have bigger problems than the city if they don't have permission from the property owner to be somewhere and do something. So we see a similar thing with building permits and contracts. If somebody's out building on somebody else's property, it's between them and the owner. We're not always seeking a formal sign off from that property owner to do those permits, but we could certainly establish that if that seems to be the direction that's necessary. So. Maybe details on this. I didn't change it. I think we did comment a little bit about size limitations. So whether it's ready to recommend tonight or not, just remember that as at least this initial concept, and it hasn't been changed since our last discussion, does restrict kind of a floor area and the amount of size of a lot. I think some of the comments were, why do we want to do that? If building size is already restricted, maybe it's not necessary, so keep that in mind. It does talk about the number of outside employees, if I remember this correct, no more than 4 instructors. So we're not talking about just maybe one person coming over, but it is saying, yeah, it could be a handful of people. But then I think the saving grace on that, or something of interest, is you as a planning commission will see these as a conditional use, and you do have the ability to say, yeah, that's too much in this situation. You don't get 4, but that's your cap. So that's kind of the intention of this. And same thing with, I think, the number of students. 12 is a number I think we've talked about a lot here as this group, saying that's your cap. And then again, it expressly says the commission can restrict, as part of the conditional use process, the number of students as well. So I think those are maybe kind of some of the key points, is percentage of space on the property that's okay to allot towards this, and the number of people involved. Are you comfortable with those?
I was just doing some, and maybe my math is wrong, but if they wanted to teach like basketball, because they had a basketball court, maybe granted the people who have basketball courts in their houses have larger homes, but if they were just using like a half court to coach, they would have to have almost a 12,000 square foot home with 20%, I think. So I think on that one, I might be in favor of raising it or getting rid of, removing it. It's up for discussion, I guess, but that was just a thing that I thought of.
And honestly, that's not that uncommon. People have stuff like that. in
Maybe we
homes,
should
so.
subsidize where somebody can build a 12,000 square foot home.
Maybe you modify the definition
so that that 20% of the gross floor area would exclude things like a indoor basketball court, because those are pretty, I mean, those are definitely in existence, but they're the exception.
They're the exception, they're
Right,
rare.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw the tennis court that's over on Bonneville by us, but I think it's a rarity in the allowed usage. I think,
Yeah, I mean, there's probably pickleball courts indoor, there's
Yeah.
probably basketball, volleyball,
I think-
tennis.
I think the number of times we'll see something like that come before us will be about as rare as anything else. I mean, a low percentage.
So we could write in an exception here, just 10% of the lot area outside the home might even be more restricted, more common then. So if you had a quarter acre lot, 8,000 square feet, you're saying only 10% of that. And again, this might be Oxy's question, how do you read 10% of the lot area outside the home? So maybe we are subtracting the square footage of the home off of that, and maybe be further restricted. If somebody had a pool or a court, it may not be enough. Right? So,
Well, yeah, I mean, in theory, you could have a quarter acre lot with a house on it, and even maybe you have a detached garage or something, and then pool takes up the rest of the area, of the backyard at least, and it would well exceed 10%, and then they aren't even allowed to benefit from this ordinance. So I don't know that either that number needs to change or that 0.8 just goes away.
we can play with some numbers here as staff and kind of refine this a little bit. We could look at square footages and things, and I think kind of to maybe our previous discussion, if I remember it correctly, because there are other more loose definitions of basically saying you really shouldn't look and change the character of the neighborhood. So that A being, if people have it, who cares how big it is? Let's let people use it and make use of it. So maybe the whole percentage and size requirement isn't necessary. We could dive into that a little bit further and maybe come up with a suggestion for you at the next meeting.
Anyone else have any? Okay, then I'm Lyle, I can do a motion now, right? Or, okay, so yeah, I would entertain a motion on this one.
What's the action item then? What are we?
Talked about maybe tabling it and handing it back to staff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like just cleaning up a couple things and bring it back for a further meeting, unless you want to just pass it along to the council, but I don't think there's a rush on this one. I think we can get corrected language to address those, doesn't sound like a lot, but that particular concern, and return to you with that.
I've done it all today. I
If
mean,
you
You're the
guys
guy
don't
to
do a
know.
motion,
All
I'm
two of
gonna be
them or
unorthodox and
3 of
do what
them.
Lyle said I could. Because
Yeah.
I'm the vice chair, not the
Go
chair.
ahead. I'll move that we table this item on instructional home occupation ordinances. Also push it back to staff for them to take input that was given and maybe revise it and bring it back for further consideration.
I'll second it.
I'll start the voting. Aye.
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 All right. So our next item is a discussion item about routine and the routine and uncontested variance processes. So, wow.
So I'm not a big expert on the specific example before you, so I hope you bear with me on that. But what I thought would be worth having a discussion on, several of you have been around on multiple variance applications over the past few years. We don't see them a lot, but occasionally they come in where somebody needs a few feet to make what they want to do work on their property. And the variance process traditionally, or as it's set up currently, is so specific. And as it's a quasi-judicial type action and the bounds you're working with, I've watched the Planning Commission time and again look at something and say, yeah, it makes sense. no, you can't have it. It just doesn't fit with the process that we have to use in front of us. In a couple of cases, we've actually just changed some ordinances or tried to find other ways to accommodate it. What this is set up to do is kind of create a new process that would allow, at least this idea, staff to get get an application or request from a property owner and applicant where their neighbors are on board with what they're trying to accomplish. And generally speaking, I think that's the uncontested component. If it's not creating a problem, everyone's on board, it would give us some ability to approve those instances. And so our attorney on staff used to work for Layton City, so he let me know about this process that they've got. So that's where we just threw in this example. And again, here it's the zoning administrator or staff is authorized to decide certain matters, generally consistent with our guidelines and rules, do not impact the character of the neighborhood. And I believe kind of what it calls out here is we've done some notice, we've held a meeting, we've given opportunity to hear from neighbors, and I think there's even the ability to get like a petition or signatures or input from neighbors to ensure that that's okay. I've found over the years that sometimes we prohibit good development by even just a few feet or some simple rules, so some design elements and things that frankly would be better. We have to say no to over 6 inches or 5 feet. I mean, it happens quite a bit. Conversely, sometimes people just want a little bit more, and you're having to, justify why you're doing something for someone else and not another. So, we're very good at trying to play fair and just stick to the rules and say yes or no. Here's what you got to work with, and just make it so. So there's a little bit of reluctancy on us as staff being able to kind of give that flexibility power, but then at the same time, the good thing about this that I like is you have the buy-in and the consensus of those who are actually impacted, and that's the difference of it's not just us saying, I think it's the right thing to do in this case. It's those impacted and the property owner coming together and saying, we think this is the better way to go. Anyway, curious, you guys probably read through it, or at least to some degree, of how interested you are in maybe exploring this a little bit further. Is this something that Kaysville City would benefit from to have as an option, a tool in the kit? And if so, what concerns might you have, or ideas might you have to make it work for our community? Very philosophical on this one, but I was curious if you thought this was maybe an idea that might address some concerns we've seen in the past.
I think back to when we changed the ordinance to make sure, when I just barely on planning commission for that home over on 1475. I think there's times when there's appropriate use, because property, as we know, is the mainstay. It's the right to utilize property in a manner appropriate, and it's a fundamental right. I think there's times when, if used appropriately, by allowing property use to move forward, it helps people in the community. If there's a way to do that, sometimes where you have a variance that is negatively affecting that, if we can allow that, that's a move forward. And the example I'll give is growing up, we had a lot behind us that was owned by the city that we couldn't build on, that was our driveway. And for many years, we went through the process of having to go condemn that. It took something like this in Salt Lake City to get that done for our neighborhood, because it went down the whole back. So I think there's things like that occasionally that you run into that are just ways that you have to work through and allow for land usage for neighbors.
So one concern that I have, and I confess I didn't read every word in the Layton example, but I gave it a sort of a once-over, and it looked to me like and I would be curious to hear Nick's input on this if my reading is even somewhat accurate. It looks to me like what Layton did is, whether it was whoever was the variance deciding body in Layton prior to this ordinance, that body said, look, there are some variances that are routine and uncontested, quote unquote. Let's delegate our quasi-judicial authority in those matters. We can define what they are, which is what I think they did. Let's delegate that quasi-judicial authority to staff. And my concern with that is, then it sounds like the staff is saying, look, the likelihood is nobody's going to contest this. Nobody's going to, a neighbor isn't going to, raise a stink, if you will, and say, you shouldn't be granting this variance because it's going to impact my property in a certain way. And therefore, while we should be meeting all the criteria of a variance, because it's still called a variance, therefore you have to meet state law requirements, 5 or 6 criteria, every single one of them, we're going to shoehorn this in because nobody's going to care. It's uncontested. And my concern with that is, I think it's a vast exception that staff ever has quasi-judicial authority. Usually that's either an appointed body or even an elected body. So that's a problematic right there. But what happens is, in the moments where it becomes contested, the exceptions where it's supposed to be uncontested, and then some neighbor says, no, I don't like staff's decision. I'm going to appeal that, which the latent ordinance allows for an appeal of the staff's decision in those moments. Then it goes to the body who probably was deciding variances to begin with, and they have to meet the letter of the law, and that appeal gets upheld, or the staff's decision gets overturned. And so I guess what I'm saying, and this is kind of what we, I think, talked about informally a few days ago, it seems like this is, how do you eliminate close calls at first base? You move first base further down first base line. Well, guess what? You're still going to have close calls when you move first base. It seems like that's what they did here. So my suggestion would be is create an ordinance, make a legislative decision that gives staff parameters within which they are then acting administratively. And it's not a quasi-judicial decision, and it's not having to ignore the 5 or 6 criteria of variances in state law. It's a legislative action from council that says, look, sometimes it doesn't make sense to deny, sorry, Abby, I almost pointed at you. So it doesn't make sense to deny this request where it goes 1 foot into the, an addition of a home goes 1 foot into a setback and nobody's going to care about it. Those don't make sense to deny. So let's create some standards. Let's pass an ordinance legislatively that creates standards that then staff can apply administratively, and then it doesn't even get into the quasi-judicial variance decision, which is very strict.
So what you're arguing is this is, and as I was reading and I was trying to understand, is this giving staff the flexibility and taking out the legislative boundary? And that's obviously what you're arguing.
Well, what I'm saying is, I think, again, I'd be curious to how Nick views it, but it looks like a portion of the quasi-judicial authority is delegated to staff, and then they therefore still have to apply the 5 or 6 criteria for a variance, but because nobody's going to contest it, it doesn't really matter. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it should be, let's create standards within which we say, examples like the 1475 one, and say, how can we write a law that would allow some flexibility for those instances, and then let staff make the decisions administratively, not quasi-judicially.
I was just going to comment. I just thought that when we did the one variance, I remember, I think that you guys have referenced this, but it seemed like that was the positive outcome, was that we were able to come up with, working with the applicant to, come up with an ordinance that would work. And it made a better ordinance. And it made it so that there were several other houses in the area that were not in compliance, were now in compliance. And in all those cases, it didn't make sense either. So it solved a lot of problems by, coming up with a better ordinance. And I think that if you go to this routine and uncontested variance process, it would just keep on sweeping things under the rug, and you wouldn't necessarily get to that better ordinance.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think this doesn't, and I think a lot of times as we're making decisions, or maybe it's just me, we think, oh yeah, well, I would make good decisions on this, but, and I would trust Lyle with this kind of power. I know Lyle knows what he's doing, but, I mean, if someone else were to come in and have that kind of discretion, I don't know if I would trust their decisions on these, and I don't think it offers a lot of protections for, not necessarily corruption, but just bad.
And generally speaking, we don't like the discretionary calls of staff. We're good, here's the rule, it means it or doesn't.
Yeah.
It's tough,
Yeah.
so.
Sure. So what's, maybe, like I mentioned, I'd be curious what Nick would say, but what's your thought on kind of my point, Lyle, at least as to what Layton's process is?
So I haven't studied this in great detail, as I confessed at the beginning, so my conversation with the city attorney was, he felt it was, and I don't know how experienced he was with the process, again, because I think it existed outside of him, I don't think he helped create it. And because staff administered it, I don't think they were heavily involved, but there's just this understanding that nobody cares, with a certain amount of discretion, let's just move on and let's not make a to-do out of it. So he felt like it could address a lot of things, but the way that I see it and as I understand, I think I'm almost 100% where Commissioner Sunloff is. A variance is a variance is a variance, and what you call it, if you're going that route, there are criteria that have to be met. We can write in ordinance through a legislative process, something different that some communities call them exceptions and modifications, and we have a few of those within our ordinances.
And we make them very narrow, right? That's not opening up the floodgates.
There. So, yeah, we could go that route. Again, I'm not comfortable I don't know, maybe I'm more confident than I say, but it's not always fun making the discretionary call.
Sure.
To the purposes maybe that Madam Chair called out this evening. Getting the standards right will be tricky, but it could be done, and they can always be massaged and finessed, and we can work on ordinances if a case merits it. It doesn't have to live in that section. We could write something completely, as has been referenced here tonight. So that's kind of just the nature of the beast. Is city of Kaysville that's 30,000 residents, and just a few pages of rules that are trying to regulate every instance, and there are just so many unique circumstances they can't. In theory, that's what the variance is trying to do, but again, we find that it's tough, and there's got to be a really good reason why you get the variance. So to call it something different, create something different, may be more the route that we want to go. But yeah, we often deal with these at the front counter and as staff, probably on a daily basis, honestly. It's just kind of, well, can I do this? Maybe a little bit more. And it's not too frequently it's brought before the Planning Commission. So it's, whether it's needed, there's probably a lot more interest than you'd believe. And sometimes it's okay to squash ideas and contain it, and there's good reason to do that. And but yeah, if we want some ability, we can. I think in order to write the exceptions, we'd have to come with specific examples before you, as to here are the things that we see people looking for leniency on. Perhaps, if you'd be interested maybe in Commissioner Sunloff or others' take, you could simply say that zoning administrator or whatever has the ability in a case of consensus amongst neighbors to vary or to deviate from the standard by 5% or something like that. Maybe that's broad enough that with that support we could write a
And
rule.
speaking of that, I mean, I thought it was interesting. Did you listen to Representative Waldrop? I mean, he commented about trying to take zoning more local. But I thought, I mean, just talking about that, neighbors, sometimes you don't get consensus among neighbors. I mean, so.
Probably rarely.
Rarely, because, everybody is defending their property line.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made that for as much as we want to help these one-off instances where it doesn't make sense to not allow certain things, on the other hand, it gets very difficult to create standards and then apply them evenly. And we might just say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep with our ordinances as written and as they get amended or changed or added to. And we'll keep with the variance process and, you know, people have to live within those parameters, period. So, I don't know, I could easily waffle either way.
Can I try to waffle Josh?
Yeah.
either way? From a strategic perspective, I'm always supportive of reducing and simplifying things that heaven knows all these statutes and ordinances have got so complicated, only attorneys and accountants understand. And you got to pay them to explain it to you. So anything that reduces and simplifies this kind of stuff, I'm always for. And if you have competent people on staff working on these kind of issues, and if you, in my line of work, where I dealt with a lot of competent people, and you want to give them latitude to use their skills to make decisions within a certain purview, the way in my career we dealt with it was latitude within boundaries was the phrase we used. Give competent people latitude within boundaries, define what the boundaries are. If you exceed the boundaries, you got to bring it forward and have a decision made by some other group. But within those boundaries, if you can define it somehow in a common sense way, then staff can make those calls that no one's complaining about. No one will ever write a letter and say, that's terrible. There's unanimity with neighbors, however you want to define that. Give certain latitude within boundaries, and then let competent staff make the call. If they're not competent, you can get in trouble.
Yeah.
To Chair Madam's point. So I'm all for simplifying any way you can. And you got to be thoughtful in a statement that defines latitude within boundaries for that particular issue. But you can do it, and once you do it, then it's done, and let competent people make those calls within those boundaries that you've defined.
Lyle, in your opening remarks, you indicated that you've seen several instances where there would have been value in whatever was being proposed or requested would have been beneficial to the city. Does the staff have a sense for, I mean, are there common requests that they're so similar that it would be easy to draft something into an ordinance? Or are they just all over the place and they're also different?
Dan is at the front counter more these days and gets all the fun conversations and ideas and concepts out there. So we could certainly work through some and see if we could identify that. I don't know if off the top of your head you have some. I'm thinking things like roof pitches, just some variation in facade detail. And a lot of stuff that comes to my mind is like an architectural detail, but.
The only thing is I like what you're saying, because a lot of times if you give an inch, you don't know, how much to go, but sometimes, you're shutting down somebody's whole idea over 6 inches, and it's, sorry, guy,
Yeah.
So, I'm like wondering, there you guys go here.
Well, see, I mean, if there are common instances, the roof pitch, if we take that for example, or height and that sort of thing on accessory buildings, especially because we may be getting more accessory dwelling units, accessory buildings going along with it. Maybe the solution isn't this, it's revising that ordinance, right? And then we just get back to what I was saying, we just stay within the ordinances, change them as they may, and variances are a vast exception, and that's just the regime we keep with.
Because variances, you have to meet, what, 3 of the 5?
No,
you
it's
mean
5
all-
or 6, you have to meet all of them.
Yeah, you meet all of them,
criteria.
yeah.
Every single one.
You have to meet every single.
You miss one and you have to deny the whole
You can't
thing.
shoehorn in.
Right.
Yeah, I can't think of like anything that would pass the variance.
Very, very few
So I think,
things.
I think on this one, I think if we need to tweak the ordinances, let's tweak the ordinances to get it done versus let's create a whole new process. And I'm a bureaucrat, so.
Yeah, that's bureaucratic cancer.
And, no, really, I think, let's not make the process more complicated.
It's already complicated.
It's already complicated. Let's make it easier for the public. If we need to fix something somewhere else, instead of creating a whole new process, let's not create a new process. I mean, Josh talked about it earlier, let's not over-regulate, let's create a system that actually works.
Isn't it true that Congress's approval ratings is like less than 10% of our citizens?
12.
Isn't that a terrible statistic? That tells you something. Things are broken. Things are too complicated. Things are too overregulated and prescriptive and directed. And citizens hate it. And that's why Congress's rate is so freaking low.
I deal in the Code of Federal Regulations for my job, and they contradict each other all the time. And so then you have to go see what it really means. You have to go, I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous.
I think, I mean, just one comment. I think that certainly, I like the idea of making things more simple, but I also worry about, like, this would open the floodgates so that everything would become an exception. And
Yeah.
so that, and then, so we don't have anybody coming and asking for, like a change to the ordinance. It's just, we'll just ask for a variance for anything, any small change that is outside the parameters. And so, I mean, that could become a big burden on the staff as well, because there's so many variances that are requested.
And even my interest, I guess, in the neighbors making the call over staff, which is, at least as it was explained to me, if the neighbors don't care, then why should we? I found over the years that they often aren't feeling the way that they'll sign a petition to placate a neighbor that's, got an issue, or, they're not gonna come out here and create a fight with their neighbor over something that they really may not like. So while it's comfy for me, in a staff position to say, well, the neighbors don't care, so it's fine, they may or may not really care. We may be creating problems that we don't understand with some of these exceptions. So, and then there are certainly cases where they're absolutely on board, and it may be hard to distinguish, but I think that's a reality is, to Commissioner Hunt's point is, how do we know they're really on board? We could create forms and we could do things, but I could see people being coerced, might be strong, but into signing off, or things can be misrepresented to them, and they'll sign and say, yeah, I'm okay with that. And so that's tricky too.
I agree. I also think I think back on the instances where there were variances that it's like, man, we really would like to approve this, but we can't because of the letter. It seems like we were able to find some solution to the ones that I'm thinking of under the guise of the existing ordinance. So that also weighs in favor of keeping sort of the status quo. The other thing that's on my mind, and I confess I know this is probably a little overdramatic, but I think it's a principle that applies, and that is, the Constitution, the United States Constitution, was founded in part on the principle of being governed by laws and not by men, humans. And if we change this to give staff discretion, then I don't think under the current staff we have, and probably future staff, that there's a risk of this, but there's a slight risk that, a friend or a neighbor or family member of staff shows up at the counter and wants something, and they're like, yeah, okay, sure. And then now it's up to the staff to set the standard. And it's not a law that sets the standard, it's the staff. And we don't want to put staff in that position. That puts them, even in their best efforts, their motives would be probably impugned from time to time. So maybe we just don't even go down this road and we keep things as they are, and we try to revise ordinances that need revising to help.
So this is kind of a random, I don't know if it addresses anything, but I think it would still come and run awry of some of the stuff that's been brought up, but could we make a conditional use? Like, they could apply for a conditional use, and then it would at least come before Planning Commission, and then we would put in like a bunch of standards that are maybe more flexible, like conditional use, non-conforming architecture, and then I don't know.
Yeah, we could consider a process.
Then it wouldn't be on staff, but then we would still be relying on the commission.
Yeah, we could look at that as, you probably still want some standards. So again, per the state, even under conditional use, you're supposed to be making decisions subject to a set of standards. And as Wilf often tries to teach us, is get as specific on those as we can. And so we kind of get back into the boat of, I think Commissioner Doxey explained it well, limits within, specific boundaries, here's what you can do specifically, and I think that's how we'd have to set it up. And the Planning Commission could be that body, if that would be more appropriate. I think what I'm getting from my notes here, and we could do this as staff, and technically this is kind of what we do. This is why the home business ordinance is before you, and others is, sometimes things just rise a little bit above the others, and that's when they come before you. If we had more time, we'd
You'd have a second
do
job.
several of these every meeting. But Dan and I, Dan in particular, that talks to people and sees some of the issues they have, and I know I'm aware of others, we could make a list and prioritize them a little bit, and it sounds like we just need to chip away at those ordinances that are restraining and, good development and good design, and bring them to a case.
It's always a number holding you.
Yeah. See the dang numbers. If you just take the numbers out,
Yeah,
you'll have other problems if you take the numbers out.
right. Okay, well, I think, again, this was just a discussion item, so
So we don't have to like.
if
close
you
it
agree
or-
that maybe that's a good direction, it sounds like we're not necessarily looking at just the carte blanche flexibility for staff, and we're okay with that. We just wanted the discussion. We'll try and keep ordinances coming in your direction, and we'll work at it that way, I think, for now. And so with that, probably no motion, and we can move on, Madam Chair, to the next item.
All right. So it looks like we've got reports, correspondence, and calendar. So this is back to you, Lon.
Do we need to make a motion?
Did we need to make a motion on the discussion item, or can we close it with that one?
I think it's a discussion item. There's no official action to be taken, so we've got some direction. Now that I'm on the microphone, we're okay without the motion. We just needed some general direction since there's no official action. The report for tonight, we have started kicking out, and you may have seen some emails, the general plan. So we've opened up kind of an online public comment period. And
I
we'll
love
keep
the
that.
public comments coming in.
They're starting to happen. We've got
Tax
it.
breaks for
The
everyone.
last one was an off-the-wall comment. Holy cow.
Which one are you talking about? The tax breaks?
It's like everything we do is a mistake.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
read that
Comment.
one.
Well, it sounds like
Throw out
we
names, but
we can put out some video or some other information to maybe help some of that, is some of the ideas we heard before the meeting. So we'll look at that as staff and maybe come up with some more details on that, and look to you as commission maybe to help participate in some of that outreach. But yeah, that's happening. That's the next step leading up to the first week of October, if I'm remembering everything correctly. So October the 6th, we'll have the public open house. We did find that we're competing a little bit with Meet the Candidates Night that they'll be doing across town over at Annie's. Ours is an open house that'll run from 6 to 8. We'll look to see if maybe there's something different that we can do with that, but I think we're kind of stuck for some different reasons on doing it that night. Hopefully people can come at least the first hour if they're interested in both, and then head over to that. If the commission's available and interested, we'd love to have your participation to hear and take comment from the public and be part of that process. We're a big chunk of it, even though the general plan itself is the planning commission's baby, so to speak. But a big chunk is a parks element. The Parks Advisory Board will be there that evening as well, talking to people about some of those elements specifically as kind of a subtopic. And we will, again, partly because of the conflict with the Meet the Candidates, but just to continue to get input, we're going to leave the boards and information here at City Hall for another week or so after the public open house, so that people can continue to discuss, at least with us as staff, and leave comments leading up to the public hearing on I think it's the 14th is when the public hearing will be. And we'll have a special meeting we're anticipating as a planning commission the night before, on the 13th, if I'm remembering my calendar dates correctly. So we'll feed you and get you at the table, and that'll just be your turn to talk about what you heard in the public process, what you've read in the plans, what your comments are, and that'll just lead up to a public hearing. So again, we'll send out the reminders, watch the calendar, and it'd be a busy week. Hopefully we're not imposing too much, but we don't do these big general plan updates too often, so just appreciate whatever time you're able to commit to that to help us get that direction. Otherwise, we'll be back on the 14th is the calendar item for our regular planning commission meeting. Again, the hearing will be a part of that for the general plan. Unless there's additional direction from the commission, any reports from things you've heard or seen, or things you want us to be working on as staff, I'll let you take that time tonight to share with us what you need.
Keep pushing to simplify. Lyle? Keep pushing to simplify.
Simplify.
I'll make two comments. I think the planning conference was eye-opening. I'm a little nervous about where the state's headed after listening to legislative and Commissioner Cameron Dale talk. I think, it kind of goes back to the state seems to want to take more control away from the cities. We keep hearing that. I think some of the ideas that were expressed from the legislative side from Steve Waldrop were interesting, but ultimately, more centrally planned, central planning type stuff. I don't see taking stuff out of local control working. Regional planning is great for region stuff, but I think ultimately you have to have local control for zoning. And I'd say the same thing with federal. You cannot get rid of local zoning. So those would come the things that I might take away from the planning conference. Great conference, other than that.
Anyone go to a session that covered a topic that's one of those ordinances or fun things that you want us to be working on?
Is it called deed restrictions? That's what I thought was the most interesting. But is that more city council, or do we ever get to do those?
Yeah, we could have that conversation with you as a commission. So ultimately, it's a housing affordability question, I think, is what you're referring to. So there are municipalities that, in a variety of ways, work with developers and impose a requirement that they deed restrict either the rental rates or the purchase price of a property to control housing prices.
And in some of that, if I can interject, Farmington recently passed into the housing affordability ordinance. Some of it they're using CRA, so community reinvestment area money. So there's 20% of that. Anytime you do tax incremental financing TIF, the city's now by law required to hold 20%. Now, a lot of that's been going into the Olene Walker Fund or down to Salt Lake County to pay for homeless. The cities up here are starting to say, well, why are we paying for homelessness in Salt Lake County when we have a housing affordability problem here? So they're pulling that back. I think the legislature now is going to be mandating and changing Section 36, which covers that, and saying for any kind of new tax increment financing, you have to use it locally to do housing. So I think there's some good changes, but they are deed restricting. North Salt Lake's looking at that also. They're working with the housing authority on that. A couple of other cities are starting to look that way. I think it'd be good, but deed restricting doesn't work with a developer without dollars. So the two have to work together. So you have to come in and you're literally subsidizing the project, whether the city gives the land or gives dollars. And I know in Farmington specifically, on two of their projects where they've now deed restricted in Salt Lake, North Salt Lake, where they've done the same thing, they've come in with enough money that like 30 to 40% of the project is deed restricted at 80 to 50% to 80% AMI for those units. And so I think if the cities are willing to go that way, you have to also have the financing to come in and also provide that. But there are mechanisms to do that.
I think, I don't think it would work in Kaysville personally, or I think it would just be difficult to convince people, but we don't necessarily have the funding and the financial or the land to incentive. Bonus density, which is essentially money, is another mechanism that people give. And so if density is something you want to approach, that could be it. But but it's a real issue, honestly, the affordability.
The way it would work, the way you'd have to do it is you'd have to have like a builder who'd come in with the land and then do low-income housing tax credit type financing and using home funding from the state, from Olene Walker, and then build the units and certify a certain number to that funding. But there's ways to do it, but it would increase density.
So what it, that's why I'm laughing. What it sounded like Lyle was saying is, in order to implement some sort of a deed restriction program in Kaysville, we would, A, have to raise taxes so that, B, we would facilitate higher density.
I think you're right.
Those are the two swear words in Kaysville.
Yeah, I agree.
So good luck with that.
Yeah, I think when you put in like a CRA area, and do we have one, Lyle, currently active?
We have a CRA, our existing, the Smith's Marketplace is the active one. It predates some of the current regulation that require some of that funding go towards housing.
So unless you update that, you're not going to be forcing that
Yeah.
regulation.
There is some consideration on doing a new one here around Main Street to help some redevelopment things, and so that
The
could be
city-
a source of funding that comes in wouldn't impact taxes directly. But yeah, it's a challenge.
But you're not raising taxes on that. The increment comes in when the project comes in. Yeah, so, but yeah, I mean, you're essentially correct, Josh. You're using two words in Kaysville that are
In Kaysville land use.
that are adverse to each other.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's interesting that Farmington has gone that direction.
Yeah.
And that they pulled their planning director, community development director, assistant city manager, and also the housing authority and worked through that process. So I think there's some cities that are trying to find ways around that and find some community solutions, like looking at abandoned houses and trying to get the city to buy them and rehabilitate them. And they're looking at some different uses for things. So I think there's some ways to do it without using the adverse words that we won't use here.
It was interesting, oh, sorry.
Yeah, right.
I was just gonna say, it was interesting, when we heard about this, it was Park City that was talking about their problems there. And they said that there was no support for this until the businesses were not able to have employees that could live in the city. And they're like, all their employees were leaving and they couldn't find employees. That's when the employers went and said, we've got to do something about this.
Yeah. And you look at where they put in the housing up there. I mean, they've done a good job, but it's some of the solutions they tried originally were just totally beaten down. I mean, I've talked with them on affordable housing multiple times, and they were. I mean, it was pitchfork. I mean, you talk about, you think Kaysville, it was pitchfork and torches coming down Main Street.
I don't doubt that.
Towards the city offices,
Yep.
and the first time they tried it, and the county owned the land, the city was coming in, they were going to build an affordable housing project and have UTA run all of the buses, so there was no impact on the city, and they still shot it down the first time. And this was 5 years ago. And now they're at the point where they were losing so much employment, they have to develop workforce housing. So, because their average age of population up there is, I think, 58, and the average number of children they have is like 0.34 for the community. So they have an aging community without a large growth. So anyway, it's just interesting to see that.
Yeah, they were saying like that, you have a problem if school teachers and like people like policemen, firemen cannot live in your community, then you have a problem. And I would say we're getting pretty close to that here.
The only thing is that we have communities closer to us, Park City. If you don't live in Park City, you're not getting to Park City in the winter to get to your job, but here you can live in these other more affordable places, which to me is kind of, I don't know, sad. Tragedy? I don't know if that's too strong.
But, yeah.
Okay, we'll keep us posted on, housing is an interesting one, and
Lyle, will you just for interest's sake, pull the affordable housing ordinance that Farmington pulled?
yeah, I'd be happy to read it.
And then North Salt Lake, Allie Avery's working on North Salt Lake also.
Looking at it right now, or is that for a future?
Yeah, and North Salt Lakes is interesting because they partner with the housing authority to be the enforcement mechanism. So they'll pull the money out of their CRA and then subsidize the housing through that. But then the housing authority then is the one who then works with the developer. So the city's paying for it, but the housing authority. So it's a good partnership.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, unless there's more from the commission, that's,
Yes.
takes us past 8:30, so I'm told that the over-under now.
I think I lost. Oh, 5 minutes? Wow, shoot.
Well, we're not done yet. We can come with something else.
I've already lost.
I
Yeah,
know, but he could lose by more. All right, anyone want to give us our motion?
I'll make motion to adjourn.
Second that.
Yeah, second, do we need a vote? We good?
No, we're
So-
good.
So moved, are you
So
gonna say
moved.
so moved?
So moved.
All right. There we go.
I was thinking